And I will just share my screen. Alrighty. Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the latest in our advocacy training series, right? We're trying to come to you regularly throughout the year and make it easier for you and your organization to interface specifically with the legislature, but also sometimes more broadly with the policy ecosystem. My name is Nick Paul. I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs for Clean Energy New Hampshire. I am joined first by our Executive Director, Sam Evans Brown. Say hi, Sam.
Hey folks, Sam Evans Brown over here downstairs from Nick.
Awesome. And we're very lucky to be joined by somebody with a great deal of experience at the State House, our friend Jodi Grimbilas. Would you like to give people a brief introduction to the work you do, Jodi?
Sure. Thank you all for having me. My name is Jodi Grimbilas. I own my own firm here, Grimbilas Strategic Solutions, right across the street from the State House. I've been a lobbyist since the 90s, since 1994, 3, 4. So I've had a pretty long career in representing lots of different industries, not just energy, but healthcare, trades, nonprofits, et cetera. So I'll speak to you today from that broad perspective on what I've learned, who's mentored me, what's changing, and hopefully it's helpful to you in what you're looking to do in this sphere. Thank you.
Thank you for being here with us. And to that last bit of what you said, want to make it clear to everyone, this is not a clean energy webinar. This is, I think obviously, if Sam and I have any takes, they'll be very much influenced by the fact that that is the issue area that we work on every day. But we want these events to have takeaways that you can use whether you're working on housing or conservation or any other issue that's important to you. So with that, this is sort of the territory we're going to work through today. We're going to examine sources of power, right? Knowing that there are many sources. Some of those are elected officials, some of those are not. But we'll sort of take a tour around those dynamics. We'll look at how the legislative session flows in terms of key dates and timelines. We'll talk a little bit about tactics that work with who and when. And having worked through all that material, my hope is that at the end of this, every person has identified a spot where they can leverage their passion and talents and connections to move the ball forward on what you care about. Um, Things to be thinking about throughout. And I do want to emphasize that because we do not have a huge group here today, um, I want to make sure that that everybody knows that you're welcome to go down to the chat and ask your questions, or even just raise your hand, and we'll do our best to recognize you. But I think the chat is probably the best way. But feel encouraged to ask questions throughout the entire presentation. But would like people to be thinking about what is a state of affairs in June that people would feel like they've had some wins on their issue area, um, where advocacy may have fallen short, either last session or in the past, and then thinking about which committees in the legislature are that spend their time on your issues and who is on those committees. A lot of our conversation will be sort of narrowing in on who these folks are and what they care about. So the first sort of source of power is the governor and council. We are a year into the AOT administration, and I think perhaps predictably, everybody feels like they know a little bit more than we knew a year ago about how this is going to go. Um, so my first sort of prompting question here is like, how are people close to the corner office feeling that things are going so far?
Do you want me to take that first?
I would love it.
Okay. Well, just to set the tone a little bit, so let's talk a little bit about our governor and council. So, unlike other states, we considerably have a weak governorship compared to other states because we have this five-member executive council that's elected by the voters. So, unlike in other states, Massachusetts has a governor's council, but it's more celebration, ceremonial type activities. Our council kind of acts like a board of directors, if you will. So there's a check and balance on our governor, our New Hampshire governor, that isn't seen in other states. So just kind of think of that. These five people really do have a lot of power. They vote on every contract over $10,000 that the state enters into. And they are the check, they are the ones that confirm any of the appointments that the governor makes. You need three out of the five votes to confirm one of her nominations. So again, quite a bit of power in that council. So Team AAP 1 year in, what's the vibe in the corner office? I think they felt like they got through the budget process fairly well. They had some very strong priorities. Bail reform was one, retirement fixes were another, and obviously continuing to have the no sales, no income tax priority for New Hampshire was also achieved. So I think they're getting their legs under them. They feel like they've met some of their priorities going, from this first session. But it's always as interesting as it is that when you have a legislature and governor all of one party, you also have sometimes, kind of infighting between, those that run the state. So I would say generally, I think she's felt like she's had some successes. But generally, I think as every governor would feel in their first year, it wasn't all easy. It wasn't like it was a honeymoon that she just got everything she asked for. So I think I would leave it at that and see if there's any questions, or Sam, if you want to add into it.
Yeah, I mean, I would just note that there have been several pretty public, high-profile disagreements between both the governor and the council and the governor and the legislature. So the reappointment of Taylor Caswell, how much and how early to print the agenda on paper versus how much the council should be relying on iPads and laptops to review the agenda. Um, and it's been interesting to watch because we hear, those of us who are in sort of the Concord set, we hear often about the disagreements between the personalities, but it's fairly rare that it bubbles out into the open quite like it has recently, which has been interesting to watch. So yeah.
Yeah, so you kind of we
Sorry.
preempted that there. I don't know if you have anything to add, but in terms of how things are going with the council, I do think, Sam, you've alluded to um, some tension.
Yeah, I've been watching Governor's Council for 30 years, and I've never seen particularly a council that is the same party majority as the governor um, in the governor's office to have kind of this difficult relationship starting off. The council wants to be very clear that they are the council and they are that check and they have policy ideas just as much as anybody else. The governor has tried to modernize some of their traditional ways of doing things, and that hasn't been taken very well. So it's been really interesting to see, and again, I haven't seen it in all my years where, council will just table an item or reject an item and the governor doesn't know it's coming. So it's been really odd, and we'll see if it starts to smooth out by the second year, but who knows?
And I don't get a ton of chances to relate uh, to the governor. But when I was working on executive council stuff, they each counselor, someone would show up at your door with a box of stuff for the next week on the Friday before. And I remember thinking, what year is it? Like, holy moly. So I guess we're going to keep doing that. Um, you spoke a little bit about the governor's priorities for 2025. Jodi, do we have any early indications of where they're intending to spend their, you know, bandwidth and influence in 2026?
Yeah, I think it was actually just reported out today that housing continues to be one of her high priorities, as well as childcare. Childcare has become a major issue in the state with folks not able to find childcare. So those are the two issues that I have heard are percolating to the top. So I think that's what we're going to see.
And it's been interesting actually. We've just had the release of former Governor Craig Benson's COGE, the Committee on Government Efficiency report. It'll be interesting to see, I think, to what degree the recommendations in that report actually become priorities for the governor, or to what degree they're allowed to simply languish on the bookshelf.
And I have to be honest, I'm so fascinated to see how that works out because if you think about it, if you wanted some of those recommendations, most of them require a law change, right? There's quite a number of them that require a law change. So unless they're going to file something as a late bill or try to add amendments onto existing bills, I almost wonder if it's, they're trying to figure it all out and then maybe it's something items that she runs on in the next campaign season or what. It just seemed the timing of the release doesn't bode with the legislative process that would implement those law changes.
I think one of the key questions we're going to keep coming back to as we talk about different individuals and bodies are who are the people that these people listen to? Because that is sort of finding a gatekeeper is sort of key for making progress, at least in my experience at the legislative level. So have any not necessarily individuals, but have any specific interests seemed like they've had the ear of the governor so far, more than others?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's actually a number, people and organizations. So, like from an organizational standpoint, her history, her background is very close tied with law enforcement. So I would always say the law enforcement issues, organizations, etc., have a very good ear from Governor Ayotte because they have aligned policies, if you will. Obviously, some of the folks that she turns to, if you look at that coach that Sam just brought up, Governor Benson, who she was his legal counsel, is one because she's tapped him to chair that. One of her key finance officers for her campaign, who is also a lottery commissioner, Andy Cruz, who is a very large, very successful businessman in New Hampshire. She tapped him to be co-chair of that COGE organization. So I think she does have definitely some folks that she looks to in terms of kind of business policy, efficient policy, governing. But then obviously I think law enforcement also has a strong tie to her administration as well.
And just to sort of add on to that, it's been interesting to see how, therefore, the public sector unions have had a voice. So Rich Gullah, the SEIU, they, correct me if I'm wrong, they endorsed nobody in the governor's race, or did they endorse both candidates? I forget how that shook out in the end. But it was an interesting dynamic, and then we saw that the governor threatened to veto the budget because of the deal that they were looking to strike on the Group 2 retirement question for the public sector unions.
Yeah, I think they endorsed in the primaries, which
Yeah.
is
You're right.
odd. But anyway, I don't make those decisions, rightly so. And then I wanted to give people a quick update on Counselor Stevens, who the last I saw was doing better.
Yes. So I've known John Stevens since the 90s. Councilor John Stevens has a long history in state government. He served as our Assistant Commissioner for Safety. He served as our Commissioner of Health and Human Services. He was a former Assistant Attorney General before he went into the private sector. So yeah, I think it was a very scary time that he had a major cardiac event while he was with his family in Florida. He is home from the hospital, home in Florida, not home in New Hampshire yet. But things are moving along. I've heard he might be on the phone for tomorrow's executive council meeting, which makes me like, just get a little bit more time. But what we'll see. But we'll find out tomorrow if he's actually on that phone call. But they say that he is recovering well, but it is still a significant recovery he's going to come back from.
Yeah, I was really relieved to see his Facebook message. I want to say that was 5 or 6 days ago now. But when he got on the other side of the really scary part of that. But I think it's important that we acknowledge that happened, and that, it's easy for us to forget that public figures are human beings with families and frailties, and uh, we're still supposed to care about each other. So,
Yeah.
um, on in the same sort of source of directional power, for lack of a better phrase, state agencies and regulatory bodies, which uh, in my personal opinion, especially with the example of the Department of Energy and the PUC, the lines there are starting to get more and more muddled year by year about what sort of separation there is, and what kind of agency they have. But Sam, could you just give people a quick reminder about sort of the difference between the missions of DOE and the PUC?
Yeah. Um, and just as a reminder, there was no Department of Energy until 2021. So it's still a baby agency. In fact, they're still in the process. They sort of laid out a 5-year roadmap for how they're going to rewrite all their administrative rules to make sure that this agency had sort of a roadmap for how it's supposed to operate, and that is still underway as we speak. But the distinction is that the PUC is the rate setting entity. It is a quasi-judicial body where you have adjudicated formal dockets with interveners that weigh in, kind of like you would in sort of a courtroom environment. Whereas the DOE is tasked with more of a policy making role. Their job is to enforce the existing statutes, do sort of like investigations, try to be the sort of the governor's voice on energy issues, which was one of the key reasons why they created the DOE, is that the governor's office felt like they didn't have a sort of executive branch voice to express their policy agenda. But then there are certain areas that sort of start to, as Nick alluded to, bleed into the types of proceedings that start to look almost like something that a PUC used to do. And the example that I give here is interconnection standards, the rulemaking over interconnection and how to administer, for instance, group net metering, have been given to the Department of Energy, and so they have formal rulemakings that have comment periods, and that heretofore had been the province of the Public Utilities Commission. And I will say, it's been interesting to watch as this new department has gotten up, and has started to do stuff, because there's been a bit of a turf war between the two agencies. And at times that has bubbled out into the public as well. And so last year there were a number of bills that were seeking to clarify the roles of the two agencies, and we had the Department of Energy and the PUC showing up saying different things in public in front of the lawmakers. And so I think there is potentially still, the story's not yet written and exactly how this will all shake out and who's going to wind up doing what in 2030.
We've recently had some folks be reappointed. specifically in the Department of Energy. We've also had some people leave on the PUC. We don't have to narrow this question to just DOE and the PUC. If there are other key personnel changes in state agencies, would love to just give people a heads up on some of those.
Yeah, and generally speaking, when it comes to PUC and DOE appointments, these are 5-year terms. So these folks outlast the governor, which is something to remember, that a new governor can come into office and they will still be working with the appointees of the previous administration, for, in some instances, quite some time. At the PUC, it's the 3 commissioners that are appointed. At the DOE, it goes down to sort of the director level. So we could share out the org chart. You could see there's the commissioner and the deputy commissioner, and then the directors are below them, and those are all also political appointees.
And Sam, I think this again kind of goes to how New Hampshire's governor is a little bit more of a weaker governor comparison to other states, where another state of governor may come in and they bring in their cabinet, right? The cabinet of all of their leaderships for all of their agencies. Not in New Hampshire. You get who you get and you don't get upset. So you have to kind of work through that process with all of your commissioners. Who's staying, who's going, who will you have the ability to nominate and appoint in the future, is a question, because it's, again, New Hampshire's a little bit different than the states around us.
Yeah, Ken, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was reading a little bit, and I was curious about the role of the Office of the Consumer Advocate. You got to excuse me, I'm a little bit new to this. I just started.
Ken, you're the target audience. This is great.
No, I mean, I just started last April, but so, maybe if you have some time to just kind of go over that role. And I know that there's a sort of an issuance that maybe you get rid of that role has been talked about.
Yeah, the consumer advocate is a position that exists in many, many, many states, and it's a recognition that in this formal adjudicated docket setting, where you have to file to be an intervener when we're setting electricity rates, often you have big electricity consumers already pretty well represented, because like a consortium of manufacturers, and often Dartmouth often will file to intervene in rate cases, for instance. It costs a ton of money. It can cost like $100,000 in lawyers and expert witnesses to do a docket. And so the residential ratepayers, that's all of us on this call, often have no voice, because we ain't got the money to pay for those fancy witnesses. And so that's why many states have created this consumer advocate role. Their job is to represent the residential ratepayers. It's not all ratepayers. Like the manufacturers, the big consumers can represent themselves. It's defined by statute. They're administratively attached to the Department of Energy, I think. Chris, you can correct me if I've got that backwards, and they're attached to the PUC, but they're an independent agency. So our consumer advocate, Don Kreese, has no boss. His boss is, well, it's overstating it. He has an advisory board, and he sort of goes and he's part of the administration, so the governor can call him in and dress him down. But he's an independent actor, and as long as he can be removed for cause, but he can't just be removed because the governor doesn't like him. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I thought I read that there was a sort of movement to get rid of that office altogether in New
Yeah.
Hampshire.
Yes, there is a bill that is actually still working its way through the process. And what it would have done is it would have taken the Office of the Consumer Advocate and completely folded it under the Department of Energy, so that Don would have had a boss, and that his boss would have been the commissioner of the Department of Energy. So it would have taken away his independent agency status, and theoretically would have resulted in him making different decisions in how he represents us all in these dockets. In the end, that bill has been changed substantially to where, at this point, what I have most recently heard is that the consumer advocate is in fact comfortable with where it has landed. So it is no longer a dramatic change of the org chart of those agencies.
Probably more bluster than anything else.
I mean it's tough because sometimes you can do too good of a job, you know, where if you advocate too forcefully and you get too much attention, people can seek to clip your wings.
Right. And to be clear, there are in my estimation, there are still problems with that bill. But I think to Representative Leon's great credit, she's the new chair of House Executive Departments and Administration. I think she made a substantial, really good faith effort to work um, with the interested parties and Dawn to find something a little less extreme than what was originally proposed. I think we all still have quibbles with what's in there, but we won't get into those today.
Yeah, and
And really, really
another
brief, just really briefly, one of the quibbles that Nick is alluding to, the current statute says the consumer advocate should be a lawyer. And the bill, as currently written, says it could be an engineer, it could be a accountant, which is something that some folks think opens the door too wide for someone to walk in who really has no understanding of how public utility commissions work.
how would you say that the executive branch, rates on if let's say if you had to give them a report card on renewable energy, because just in my estimation, the state seems very anti-renewable energy to me with reallocating funds back into the general fund from the renewable energy fund.
Well,
So
I think it depends, Ken, who we're identifying as the state, right? If we're talking
I mean, the
about
executive in
if
particular,
we're
if you had to rate the executive branch,
incomplete,
governor or executive.
Yeah.
I would give them an incomplete. I think um, when you are in a position like governor, um, what your priorities are not just an expression of your deeply held convictions. They are necessary calculations about what can be done in a given environment with the resources at hand, and those decisions have political consequences. So I think for me, just as a person who works in this space, um, it is not clear to me what the governor's energy policy is to this point. I think we have some campaign um, language, which is really in line with what we've heard from a lot of national Republicans, which is an all of the above energy strategy, which I think is a sandbox we will gladly play in. Um, and that we are very confident that renewables will come out of that sort of conversation on top anyway. So we're happy to use that lens. But I think to this point, it is unclear, what are we gonna do about it? So I mean, Sam, you can qualify that further, but that's just how I feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, it would be uh, dishonest to suggest that it wouldn't be easier to do renewable energy policy in any of the surrounding states, right? Like it's obviously going to be easier to get stuff done in one of the other New England states than it is in New Hampshire right now. But you know, we're playing it where it lies is the short version. Jody, that's a golf metaphor. That's for you. I put
I
that one.
like that. Thank you.
Um, I want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk about the legislature itself because I think those dynamics are actually much more interesting and complex, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and
I can, if you want, Nick, I can knock this question out really quick, though. I
yep.
talked about this a little bit. Both agencies do rulemakings. Both can do reports. The PUC does investigatory dockets as rate making dockets. The big difference is that the PUC sets rates. They decide how much you pay for electricity, and they decide relevant to renewable energy. They decide how much you get paid for your production for these state jurisdictional projects. That's the big distinction. And they take months, months and months and months.
Um, so moving on to the House of Representatives, Um, we're not going to have time today in one 90-minute webinar to sort of like even go through the sort of everyone that's in leadership. We're certainly not going to get to touch on every committee. We're certainly not going to talk about 400 individuals. Um, but I think in the context of this question, who does the majority caucus take their cues from on energy policy specifically?
Sure. I think if you don't know, the House in New Hampshire is Republican controlled. So the speaker has been the speaker we've had for since COVID, 2020. Speaker Packard. Um, the what do they care about? They care in the House in particular, and when it comes to energy prices, they care about affordability. They care about low cost. They care about making sure we don't become the states around us. They are very, very much counting how much is the ratepayer going to pay. That seems to be their kind of number one goal when it comes to energy policy in the House. Again, they do like the all of the above strategy, as Nick mentioned before. They do like the idea of new small modular nuclears or other types of innovative um, energy sources, although they're not fans of offshore wind. So it's kind of the dynamic I think you see nationally, and this is kind of where we stand in terms of the Republican leadership of that particular committee. Obviously, other committees have other cares that they focus on.
And the just the as a bit of there's also committee leadership, which uh, is important too. That and generally speaking, um, the well, I guess I don't want to make. I guess I'll just say this now is that like the person who is appointed as committee chair of the relevant committee also has an enormous amount of power in deciding what the overall caucus's position on a given bill is going to be, and so that is an important leadership role for any bill that you see getting worked on.
Yeah. I think what's also interesting is how our committee's structured. Well, it always ends up depending on how the House turns out. So if we remember 2 years ago, was it 2 years ago? Time flies. We were basically split. So committees at that time ended up being 10 Republicans, 10 Democrats. So that was a first in my lifetime to see that. Now we have that Republican majority, so I think it's like, is it 12 to 8 now? I have to, or 11-8, depending on how many people they have on a committee.
10-8.
Republican.
Yeah.
So the staff researcher's role, I find that is really is a staff researcher role. They are not necessarily. We had a staffer for the House Energy Committee who had been there for, I don't know, 3 decades. You could go to, his name was Joel. You could go to Joel and he would be very helpful in getting information. The new staff we have a lot of new staff in the House. They're still feeling their way. They're extremely helpful. They'll always get you an amendment. They'll always get you some information, but they're really more of an administrative role versus staff like you'd hear about in other states where they're much more interested in the policy. Here, I think they're a little bit more administrative than they are in including themselves in the policy discussion.
Yeah, and I think one of the things to note is um, even though the Senate is also a volunteer legislative chamber, they have a lot, still insufficient, but a lot more staff support um, than the House folks do. Um, and I think when we think about issues and how they move through committee and to, say, a floor vote or a caucus meeting in advance of a floor vote, there are these um, relationships and permission structures that have built up over time where uh, House leadership specifically, but also Senate leadership, who are maybe not fully immersed in an issue area or the debate around a specific bill, really rely heavily on a member of that committee. Sometimes it's the chair, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a member of the other party. But whatever your issue is, finding out who that person is can save you a great deal of time. Um, Committee reassignments over the past few months, I mentioned Erica Leon moving and replacing Carol McGuire as chair of executive departments and administration in the House. Have there been any other key reassignments that have been on either your radar, Jody, or anybody who's on the call that has had some new folks on their relevant committees wants to share?
Looking really quick, but Carol McGuire, who was the chair of House Executive Departments, is now on House Finance. There's been a few kind of maturations of folks that have moved here and there. I think on the Energy Committee, you have a new member in, I think he came right at the end of last year, Representative Matt Saborin Shitani Ray, who was added to the committee. So we have had sometimes I think we've had six members of, to get my numbers out, six members of the House that have either moved away or had to resign their seat. Some have had special elections to fill that seat, some have not. So there are some just general changes. The House website is very helpful in terms of who's on the committee, what their addresses are, and how to get in touch with them. So if you don't know the state website, that's a very important place to start.
And it's actually I'll just narrow in on Representative Tom Ploget, who was on Science, Technology, and Energy, as an interesting story because he was a more moderate Republican and he broke with the party on a number of votes. And as a result, he was stripped of his committee assignment, and a new representative was put in that position. And so it's important just as a case study because oftentimes we are working across party lines and trying to get folks to break with their caucus, and there are consequences for folks when they do that, and that's an example of the type of thing that can happen.
Yeah, and I don't think it was an energy issue that Representative Ploget crossed lines on. It was some of the other bigger issues in the House. So we've seen that happen. A vice chairman lost his vice chairmanship over some issues. I know their lead ranking member also lost her position. But that has been going on since day one. Speakers years ago used to change people's committee assignments. They might have parked near the State House, and then maybe they started parking near like 3 miles away. Like it just things got changed because you didn't vote a particular way. So that's not new. That's been happening for decades.
It's a rough business.
It's a rough business.
I don't want to go through every single type of legislative proceeding, but something that, since getting into sort of government relations work that was instructive for me was how full committee work sessions sort of play out and how important they are and how little attention they get in relation to a public hearing. So would love to just sort of talk through a little bit about like what is a work session, what happens there, and
Sure.
sort of how the sausage is made.
Sure. And when we get to the Senate, we'll talk about how the Senate doesn't really do work sessions, right? So the House with 400 members and 20 committees and 20 people on each committee, they are known as the detail body, right? So they are the ones that actually have the time to read the bills, read all the words, check the citations, make sure that, things are hopefully T's are crossed and I's are dotted. So part of what makes them the detail-oriented body is their work sessions. So I always say the public hearing is very important. You have to have all your arguments and data points clearly presented, but the real work is in the work sessions, which is usually a smaller group. So if there's 20 members on a committee, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 4, maybe it's 6. a subcommittee will get together and they will talk further after what they've heard from the public hearing. They'll try to condense it into, kind of get into more of those details during the work session. So it's very important as someone who cares about an issue to be there, to be seen as a resource, to be able to add your voice, and hopefully present maybe there's new information that you have since the public hearing. Very important for them to have, because that subcommittee will ultimately make a decision that they bring to the full committee. And a lot of times the full committee will follow their lead because they haven't had the time. The other 14 members are like, great, those 6 did it, wonderful. And there's people from both sides of the aisle on those subcommittees. And so quite honestly, it's where the devil in the details really gets worked out. And it's critically important to be involved in those work sessions when you can be.
Absolutely. I've also found, at least on, I mean, in several committees, but at least in ST&E, it seems that the informality
Mhm.
lends itself to
Good
a more
discussions.
a more authentic discussion than they would
Yeah.
have, which is kind of silly to think about because they're both often streamed on YouTube just the same. Um, but I've enjoyed observing that dynamic. Are there any, not traps necessarily, but maybe stumbles that we sort of see advocates um, deal with sort of session after session in terms of the House specifically, but if not, at the legislature in general?
Yeah, the house rules are really important. It's kind of like any profession. You have your general foundation of rules that you abide by, and the legislature is no different. So when it comes to um, advocacy, it's really important to understand those rules and know what a higher motion is. If the motion is ought to pass, then, a higher motion could be to indefinitely postpone something. So you could try to go forward with passing a bill, but if somebody comes in and says, I want to indefinitely postpone or I want to table it, those are higher motions, so they get voted on first. It's a little complicated. They've changed it over the years. You used to be able to substitute motions. Well, that was just a brain flame trying to figure those out. They finally decided that wasn't the way they were going to go anymore. But knowing those rules, the basic Robert's Rules of Order, I think it's Robert's Rules or it's Mason's, one or the other, they are really important. And quite honestly, legislators, particularly new ones, don't always know them either. So you try to be that expert resource helper when it comes to whether it's a debate, leaning into a vote, knowing what's going to happen on the House floor. It's really important to know those rules of engagement in terms of how a vote can happen, what motion comes first, second, third, etc. Because that will tell you how your strategy is going to play out.
Yeah, and we're lucky that we have a very knowledgeable and dedicated House clerk.
Oh, he's
Uh,
wonderful.
I'm certain that without him, our government would grind to a halt. And something else that I've noticed is that often um, committee chairs or committee leadership will have either a different or ambiguous interpretation of the rules of how they're supposed to facilitate whatever proceeding they're in, whether that's a public hearing or not. And it's always interesting to sort of see how different committees approach different directives from the Speaker's office and how they enforce them or not. Um, and I think it's just a reminder to be mindful that especially in the House, there's really not a one size fits all experience. It really does vary committee to committee. So Sam, did you want to?
And I was just going to say, I mean, to exactly that point that you just made, there was a period in which in ST&E, Science, Technology, and Energy, a bill would be heard, and on the same day there would be a new amendment or a place all amendment brought in, and there was this insistence that you had to speak to the bill and not the amendment, and you would get called out by the chair if you tried to talk about the amendment, and so that can be immensely frustrating. And so I would just say to folks, if you are interested in going to the State House and speaking, it behooves you to try to figure out how to have your voice be heard in such a way that won't trigger these folks because they will often rely on any excuse to not listen.
Right. And not to belabor the point, but just another quick example. On ST&E, they really like you to not read your prepared testimony. They like you to speak off the cuff, which really doesn't seem like something that they need to be concerning themselves with, how citizens decide to make their voices heard. But I fell into that one, and looked sort of silly, um, at a public hearing, and regardless of my feelings about it, I wouldn't do it again. Uh, I would prepare still something written in ahead of time, but something separate from what I was handing them. So with that, let's switch over to the Senate rather. So again, sort of starting with the same question, and maybe we can get a little bit more specific here because the Senate is a much smaller, more manageable group of folks.
Right. So our Senate is very small, 24 members, smaller than most of the states around us again. Bigger House, smaller Senate. So 24 members, 16 are Republicans, 8 are Democrats. So again, it's a Republican majority. And what do they care about? They tend to be now, if the House is the detail-oriented body, the Senate is more the broader public policy thinking body. They, as a smaller body of 24, they don't have the luxury of having 20 people study these issues and just kind of rely on their recommendations. Most of the senators have to be fairly well versed in all of the issues going forward. So, what do they care about? They're going to care about anything that deals with our state budget. Our budget is not in the best of shape. Monies and revenues are not coming in as they were hoped. They're starting to tick up, but they're not quite there yet. So anything that has to do with the fiscal status of the state, and then I don't think the Republicans have come out with their platform yet, but I would expect we'll see a platform coming soon, probably on energy and healthcare, some more of the law enforcement policy issues, and usually they get involved in kind of the voting with a V, voting debates probably coming forward as well. So it'll be a wide variety of topics. Very. So a little bit different in I mean, the Senate is again an interesting body because you can really get to know 24 members pretty well. I would say probably in the first time in quite some time, I've seen a little bit more centralized decision making in the caucuses, where, kind of in the past, I would think senators always had the ability to kind of vote their conscience, vote their districts, vote a little bit differently than the rest of the pack. That was always what made the Senate fun, is you could kind of really make something bipartisan. I think right now, with the way things are going, both nationally and now in New Hampshire, it's really kind of caucus-based decision making, a little bit more so than it has been in the past. What's nice is in the Senate Committee on Energy, you have a chair and a Democratic ranking member who have gotten along and worked together for years. And I think that is probably one of the few committees that really has that level of rapport between the different sides of the political aisle on the Energy Committee. So again, it's not all, everybody's doing the same thing, but there are some interesting relationships in the Senate that work to different degrees.
For sure. Definitely more of a collegial vibe going on. Um, and to your point, definitely very much on ENR, is something that we've observed as well. Um, are there any relationships in the Senate? You just spoke to one. Are there any other relationships in the Senate that have been particularly fruitful, that have crossed the partisan divide, regardless of issue area?
Probably on individual circumstances. I'm trying to think. Like I know on healthcare, we have a senator from the North Country who's a pharmacist, and we have a senator from the Sunapee kind of area, Lebanon, Hanover area, that is a first responder. And quite honestly, they work really well together on a lot of healthcare issues. So there are definitely relationships. There's a lot more new members, but many of them came from the House, so they knew each other. So that was kind of a plus too. I would say one of the senators from the Bedford area, Denise Ricciardi, she crosses party lines all the time. She's very comfortable in making sure that she's voting, and she'll tell you straight out, I'm going to vote with my district. I'm going to vote with what I think is right for the state. And she's not necessarily going to vote with her party. And so, quite honestly, she's someone that kind of stands out to me as very bipartisan on a lot of things.
And it's funny, I think of this one and all I can think of is Lou D'Alessandro and casino gambling. You
Yeah.
know, like there's certain issues with these sort of iconic aisle crossers that sort of exemplify New Hampshire politics.
Yep. Definitely relationship based. We're a small
Yeah.
state.
Yep.
Very much so. This next question was prompted for me by the observation that, especially on the Senate side, there always seems to be a deal at the end, where a bunch of things that don't belong together um, get thrown together at the end in some sort of let's give everybody something, some more than others, uh, depending on what the case is. Um, but I'd be interested because, it's just been a few years for me. I'm sort of interested in over a longer period of time, what sort of patterns do you see sort of year after year as we get closer to coming down to the things that are actually going to move or not?
Yeah. So I think for members of the public that don't spend a lot of time with this legislative process, they can understand the Senate hearing process, they can understand the House hearing process, but that committee at conference time is a shit show in most people's minds. Like, what does this
Yeah.
mean? How is this working out? Why is there a bill on cigar taxes now attached to a bill on healthcare? What happened there? And again, it all comes down to a lot of relationships and a lot of strategic posturing. Um, you will find that, what's interesting about the New Hampshire process is every bill has a public hearing. That does not happen in other states. A chairman could decide in another state that this bill is never going to see the light of day. They put it in their drawer and it doesn't. In New Hampshire, every bill has a hearing, every bill has a committee vote, every bill has a full body vote. So when the House feels strongly about something that the Senate doesn't feel as strongly about, and vice versa, that's when the games start getting played. Because members of the Senate will take their position and they'll tack it onto a House bill that they know the House wants, and vice versa. So it gets very complicated to make sure you are tracking the bills that are of interest to you, because they could end up on another numbered bill that you never even thought was even in play. It wasn't even something that made sense to you. So is there a typical trade pattern? No, it's usually what the House wants, they put on a Senate bill, and what the Senate wants, they put on a House bill. Or maybe they'll put it on two House bills, and sometimes they'll put it on three House bills. They will do what they can to load it up so that they can make sure their policy is going to go forward. And they'll look really deep into the bills to choose which bill maybe they put something on. They put something, when you're trying to pass a bill, it's very hard to tell a client at the end of the day, oh, we had support from the Senate and the House, but you know what? They tacked something on it that nobody liked it and the whole thing failed. But that can happen and has happened. So it's really it's a hard part of the session to track, and it's a hard part of the session to always understand, because some of it's personalities, sometimes it's policies, and oftentimes it's politics that kind of throws all of that into chaos. I don't know that that answers
No,
really,
it absolutely does answer the question, and I think this the the most recent cycle of committees of conference were pretty interesting and felt a little bit different. To me, to your point, there were a few of these bills where there were a ton of non-germane amendments, and rather than it panning out that it strengthened or weakened anyone's position, they just toppled under their own weight because they got in the room and looked at each other and said, "This is my position. This is my position. Oh, I guess we're done. Goodbye."
And I'll be honest, I think one of the things that COVID changed was this ability to have omnibus bills that had all these different things. That didn't take place as much as it does now because during COVID, for them to pass anything when they had to shut the State House in March and they did everything online or through Zoom, to make it easier for them to get through some of the big issues that they need to, they did make these big omnibus bills. So it kind of became an idea or a strategy out of necessity, but it's something that we're seeing carrying on to this day, where it wasn't quite as much of that years before.
For sure. I wanted to ask this last question in the context of the Senate because I think the House is a little bit more choose your own adventure. Um, but I think one asking folks to come in and deliver testimony verbally in front of a committee is a sort of a high lift ask. And I think a huge bit, and sometimes it's not the right lever to pull for a certain individual or organization. But I think we do find that when we do ask folks to do that, there is sort of a huge barrier is getting over like the unknown of is expected and building up sort of like what you have to produce and bring to the table in order to come to the State House and be heard. So knowing that different circumstances would have a different answer to this question, just like generally speaking, if someone really cares about an issue, what is the sort of generic toolkit to show up and show that you're a serious person and you'd like to be heard?
Um, Actually, that's an easy question for me because when I have people come into the State House, I say, write your testimony, read it to yourself, tell me if it's less than 3 minutes. Because when it's in the Senate and they have, I think their first day of hearings for some of these committees, they have 5 bills to do with 10-minute increments, and they're big issues. So they're stressed for time. So whenever you can make something brief, to the point, with appropriate data, perhaps supplementing it, knowing that they probably won't read it unless they're really, really interested in the topic. You have to be clear in your communication and you have to hit the main points right out of the gate. I'm here, I oppose this bill for A, B, and C, a paragraph or two in between, and then you repeat it at the end. And I'm here opposing this bill because of A, B, and C. Sometimes I think some people feel like, I just am not telling them all the detail. They're going to lose all the detail. You're going to make the point very clearly and in a very brief and clear way. Supplemental materials, I think, is always important because you can put them into the file. The staff will have it when they're writing their hearing reports. Will all of the senators read it? They might not have time to, but it's good that it's there because it's in the record. And you want to make sure that your information is in the record. So 5 years from now, when I'm researching it, I see what was in that record. So I would think it's have your supporting materials, but boy, oh boy, if you're testifying, hit them right with the points that are most important. Keep it to 3 minutes and under, and you'll have much more successful testimony.
That is the best advice I've ever heard.
Oh,
Predictably. No, I think if you're going to bring something to give a committee, especially if you're a private citizen, not representing an organization or interest group, if it's more than one page and doesn't have any pictures, you might be putting in more work than is going to pay off, and the juice is no longer sort of worth the squeeze. in terms of time, effort, and stress of preparing to do something scary. So for some of us, right?
Yeah.
Before we move on from the legislature, want to make sure if there are any questions in the chat. I rely on my CNH colleagues to point that out while I'm sharing my screen here, but want to make sure that folks still feel welcomed to jump in with any questions that they have. Okay. Um, so there are a lot of people at the State House who are not elected, and who aren't just concerned citizens, right? So I think like leaving them out of the discussion is not giving folks sort of the full picture of what's happening. Um, so there are lots of different types of folks at the State House talking to our elected officials, and they're there for many different reasons and work in many different ways. So for me, as a politics guy, my first to the point question is who's spending a ton of money to have a really solid presence at the State House in its current makeup.
What I find interesting, and again, kind of over my career, it's changed. So ever since, oh, I'm not going to remember the name of the case, but there was a case that allowed for more money to be spent. It'll come.
Citizens United.
Thank you. I would say out of state organizations are have come in such a huge way that never used to be here before. I mean, yes, you had our traditional New Hampshire industries that always had a presence at the State House. They would always give to members of the legislature, but they are just not anywhere near some of these out-of-state national organizations that come in now. It's mind-blowing to me. So people always say like, oh, you lobbies. I'm like, oh, I'm not even considered anything compared to those national organizations that really bring people on events, bring people to seminars and junkets and this and that. And it's just very different than what it used to be. And
Absolutely.
they're in all different areas of whether it's voting or social issues or national, like it's just kind of all over the map.
Absolutely. And like an example of that is I went to um, I believe it was a work session and then executive session for ST&E a couple months ago, and there was a there was a booklet on the table, and the booklet was all about why renewable energy is a terrible communist hoax paid for by Americans for Prosperity, which you just don't
It's a
always.
very well-known organization in the
Right.
state, and they have continued to grow every year. It's really fascinating to me. Again, not you would think it's like your local this business, this business, this business. They're important, but they don't have the funding like these out-of-state company organizations do.
Right. Um, are there folks that are more informal, right? They might be people who used to work in the in state agencies or the governor's office that linger sort of in the background, or folks that, if you went on a government website, it would not be clear to you that they're helping make a lot of these important decisions.
Yeah, so I always kind of I kid some of the clients that we have. So I think my firm of Adam, myself, and Heidi are the only lobbying firm that doesn't have anybody that was ever elected in it. We have never been elected by anything, been on a ballot for anything. We are just lobbyists that have kind of grown into the profession. Most of the lobbying groups, are headed by a former Senate president or headed by someone who used to work in House leadership or was a senator or there's a lot of or ran for Congress or just a lot of different groups. They get their love of the political process while serving, and then they take that love when they leave and turn it into a potential career path for them. So they're definitely a lot more lobbyists now than there used to be. Nonprofits, it's shocking to me sometimes even like some of our nonprofits have like a stable of lobbyists because everybody, it's such a lot of work that it takes a lot of people. So How are they influencers? They may be really good resources in a particular area. There are folks that just you're seeking expertise. Everybody wants to try to show their expertise in a particular subject matter. Those are the folks that generally are your advocates, validators, and lobbyists.
And particularly, again, in a state that has a volunteer legislature, which which means not as a criticism, but as a matter of course, the vast majority of folks serving an elected office are not issue experts.
Yes.
Um, or anything approaching issue experts. So I think folks who are on hand, especially folks who are on hand who may reinforce preconceived or philosophical notions are really welcome and powerful voices. How does specifically the New Hampshire media ecosystem feed into how some lawmakers are approaching their work?
I might give that one to Sam because
Yeah.
he understands the local media way better than I
Yeah, I thank you for. I actually did want to take this question, so I appreciate being prompted. It's funny. So media, generally speaking, has become incredibly nationalized. You have, New York Times, Washington Post, big national newspapers have more subscribers than they've ever had. And meanwhile, local newsrooms have been absolutely hollowed out. There's a great report which I'm not going to be able to rattle off the organization that puts it out that just looks at how many journalist jobs there are across the nation, and it's fallen by like almost 2/3 over the past 2 decades. So it's hugely problematic. When I started at New Hampshire Public Radio in 2011, there were 5 reporters in the newsroom. It grew to the point where we had 12, and in that period, and 2011 already the local newsrooms had shrunk dramatically. But when we started, we were one of the smaller newsrooms in the state, and when I left, we were the biggest newsroom in the state. And the union leader had gone from 20 reporters to like 5. So uh, generally speaking, it's really hard to get the attention of lawmakers through press coverage in a way that I think has dramatically changed politics. It used to be that getting a bunch of papers in, articles in a bunch of papers was a really good way to get attention to an issue. My perception has been that it is no longer the case that that's a surefire strategy to get much done. It can help. You can prompt a discussion. You can bring attention to something, but it's only one small piece of a strategy towards gaining attention and movement on an issue. Um, and more to the point, I think there's increasingly become information ecosystems, and so if you want a particular party to pay attention to your particular issue, you have to really pick and choose which outlet you're trying to get coverage in, because if you want the Republicans to care about something, getting your op-ed or getting your story in the Concord Monitor isn't gonna move the needle. And so it's tough as a guy who loves the media and loves journalism. It's been sad to see, but just to be totally honest with y'all on the call, it was one of the reasons why I left journalism, is that it felt like no one was listening.
I would just say that when I first started, I had to read 3 papers a day. I had to read the Concord Monitor, the Union Leader, and the Nashua Telegraph. The Nashua Telegraph doesn't really do I don't think state and local politics anymore.
It's
But
once a
now,
week.
do they? I don't, yeah. Now I have the Union Leader, the Concord Monitor, In-Depth, New Hampshire Journal, New Hampshire Business Review. There's another one I'm not thinking of, the Bulletin. So I'm like up to like 7 different news organizations I read daily. And I'm probably the only person in this world that's happy when they repeat stories because it just takes one less thing off my plate. But
Yeah,
it's very interesting to me how it's changed because it has changed quite a bit.
yeah, it's very fragmented.
Um, a lot of what we do is try to pair um, message and messenger
Mhm.
in the most effective possible way. Um, so, I'm wondering if you have any examples or stories where that has either gone really well or gone very poorly, and what your impression um, is, especially when uh, someone's trying to make, either a specific technical change or whether they're trying to make more of a values-based argument.
Um, I always think about who the messenger is when it comes to clients coming to the State House to testify. And I always think about like how well can they get those points across, whether they're technical. Sometimes it'll be an issue. I'll be like, send me your HR person. I don't need the president. I need the HR person, because if they ask a question about workers' comp, you're going to look around. I'm not going to know the answer, but your HR person would. So I try to kind of like, what kind of questions might this issue bring forward or present from the legislators that are listening, and then try to have the right person either there testifying or there in the room to be able to answer those. I do like to bring in clients because they know their business, their trade, their whatever best. If it's a short and quick, well, then I can probably handle it. But if it's something that gets into the weeds, again, it's usually more the Q&A time, but you want to have the right person there.
So I want to. So Sherry has a question in the chat, which I think is sort of like a synthesis of what we were working on. It's kind of a big question. I also think it's one that's like more or less outside of our individual realm of expertise. She was asking about a specific bill, which is the bill that increases the voter registration requirements. But the broader question is like, if you wanted to get a bill that has passed, if you wanted to get it repealed, if we were to try to sort of like synthesize this all down, what are sort of like the key takeaways from what we've been laying out for folks? Like, what does it take to actually get a bill passed and signed into law?
It's harder to pass a law than kill a bill, right?
Right.
So again, because of New Hampshire's process with all these different stops along the way, if you're trying to kill something, you might have you have at least 2 to 3 times, 4 times to try to actually get it killed. Passing a law takes a lot more. So, because you really have to work, and that is where, again, when I'm trying to pass a bill, I think that work starts before the session starts. The session may start in January, but when I know I've got a bill that needs to be passed, I'm reaching out to the legislators on the committee. I'm reaching out to the legislators in the Senate. I'm reaching out to the leaderships. I'm reaching out to stakeholders that I think either like it or don't like it, just to try to get at least our positions and our focuses to see if we can get some of the questions answered before one of the questions ends up killing the bill because we haven't thought it through. So I think when it comes to passing a bill into law, you really need to, your due diligence really needs to take place. I would almost say, 6 months started before the session. You really need to start working with folks. If a bill is fully passed and signed into law and then you want to repeal it, my first thing is you look at the environment, right? What's the environment for a repeal? If it's the same people that just passed it because it's just the second year of the biennium, well, that's just a waste of your time, because it's not going to be a bill that if the same group just passed it, the same group's not going to repeal it.
Yeah.
You'll wait. Again, we have 2-year cycles, and we have a third changeover of legislators every 2 years in election cycles. So I would suggest that you wait for that new elected body that comes in. And then sometimes I even still think about, like, was it good to do it the first year, or is it good to do the repeal the second year? Because I've gotten to know people and I've gotten to know how this body works and what their issues are. And so it's a lot of studying. It's kind of like, I don't know, you're on the highway, you're going to get on the on-ramp, you're studying first. Is there cars coming? Is there something? Like, you just kind of figure that stuff out before you pull out into the roadways. You really do some of your homework ahead of time before but you got to kind of look at that entire environment. You can't just say, well, I don't like it, so I want to repeal it. You might be wasting your own time because it's just not the time to do it.
Yeah,
Right.
and go ahead, Nick.
No, I was just going to say that the same, if the committee, if the folks on the committee haven't changed, they're not going to come back next year and say, "Oh, we were wrong." Sometimes even when they've been demonstrably wrong, they're not going to change their mind on an issue and go back and strip their idea that they were very proud of out of statute a year later, right? So, I think that that is like that sets up a different type of advocacy, which is getting involved in elections, which is we don't do that. Um, and Jody doesn't either. But
I don't either. I
if
just work with whoever you all send me.
what I often say is if the problem is the asses in the seats, you need to change the asses in the seats. Um, and excuse my language, but that is sort of how I look at it. Go ahead, Sam.
Sherry's nuancing the question in the chat, which is that I think she's asking perhaps some more. Well, and first I'm going to try to take one quick stab at answering the bigger question, which is that this is the art of policymaking, right? Is that there's a lot of different ways that you go about convincing the people who are sitting in the chairs that they should pass a piece of legislation, and that can include grassroots action. It can include a media strategy. It can include a lot of different strategies. It can be a legislative strategy, which includes potentially putting forth a bill that dies, and you know it's going to die, and that's part of your strategy. But that can't be the whole strategy. But then Sherry's now asking sort of a more nuanced question, which is that you have to pass a new law. Is it too late in the process right now, today, December 16th, to put in a new bill? Jody, so there is a bill filing period. That
Yep.
period is currently closed, but the Senate has special rules. You want to vamp on that, Jody?
Sure. So there is a rules committee that can, if a senator wants to kind of try and think when they'll meet again, but they usually meet every now and then. The senator would have to bring forward a bill and a request to allow for late filing, is what they call it, the late filed bill. You have to kind of know again your deadlines, because comes to a point you can't come back in March and say I want to put a late filed bill in because you've missed all the deadlines and it just doesn't work. It would have to be probably in the next few weeks that a senator, and the committee doesn't have to allow it in. If they determine that, well, you should have put it in when you had the time, when the filing period was open, or it's too late to do that, there's a million reasons they can turn it down. They have turned it down. The House has a committee that does the same. They've turned bills down because they just have decided that it's not ripe, and then it would be better to be brought forward another year. You could try to amend an existing bill, right? There's bills already in on all kinds of topics. You could find a germane bill, a bill of a similar topic, and try to amend that. That's probably the way you'd have to look at going if you can't get a new bill filed late.
Right. And you can even put in a non-germane amendment. Like you could take a bill about like car registrations and turn it into a voting rights bill. It's just that it's a higher hurdle to get over because non-germane amendments have to have a second hearing, and it can be difficult. So the easiest way is to get the bill in during the bill filing period.
Yeah.
And I want to bring attention to the fact that we're creeping up against time here. So we've got about 10 minutes left. Want to just point to the fact that these slides will be available in our member portal. But these are the major dates and deadlines as proposed for House rules, which will be voted on. These are not final, but usually the proposed deadlines get approved. The Senate often corresponds very closely to these deadlines, but not always. And as we were just sort of alluding to, the Senate sort of makes its own rules as it goes, because they have the I don't want to say the power, because the House has the same power to change their rules, but they sort of have the bandwidth to change the rules if they need to, whereas the House is a little bit more reliant on sticking to what they establish at the beginning of the session, typically, right? So we're looking at January 7th for the formal beginning of the session. You'll see in February some business about bills going to a second committee Jodi, can you explain the circumstances under which that would happen?
Yeah, some bills have to go to two committees, two policy committees. One will be the initial policy, kind of what it's about, healthcare, energy, whatever it might be. If it has a fiscal impact, it spends money, or it has a fee or something and it raises money, or it changes a profession and it has to go to executive departments for that, then it can be sent to a second committee. So, and then you have to have, they don't always have to have a public hearing again, but they usually have some kind of explanation of what the bill does. So those bills that have an FN or again, a fee, a new revenue stream, et cetera, they generally have to have a second committee review, whether it's finance or ways and means, or again, could be executive departments generally. If it's got a criminal penalty, it might have to go to criminal justice. So that's when a second committee is required.
And March 26th is crossover or the last day to act on bills in the House in which they originated, right? So conceivably, the Senate will finish its Senate bill, voting on all of its Senate bills. By that date, the House will finish voting on all their House bills, and then the process starts over on the other side of the wall, um, as we say.
Yep.
All of this information is available on the House calendar. And again, want to emphasize that these are the proposed deadlines. They are not yet final, but you can easily find those in the House calendar. We've touched on a lot of we've already touched on sort of the intricacies of what can happen to a bill, but there are some specific situations that I've found interesting over the years. Um, Self-explanatory that a bill with a fiscal note tends to be more complicated, or the burden of proving that you need to pass a law is a little bit higher because the stakes are higher when there's a fiscal note. Anything to add there? So, sometimes you can tell, like sometimes it's a vibe in the room, where there are signals that a bill is either going to be substantially pared back or is maybe going to be put into interim study or turned into a study commission or something like that. Have there been any telltale signs over the years where you can sort of tell in the room or early on in the process that something like that might be the ultimate fate?
So when a bill goes to the House floor, back to your deadlines, when you get to that crossover, like anything else, we do the easiest things first and the hardest things last. So they're going to vote on all the easy bills in February. Boom, 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 done. When they get to that March date, those are all the hard ones. All the hard ones that have lots of debates. You want to see a bill get tabled, put 6 people that want to speak on it on the last day of the session, and that bill will be tabled because nobody wants to sit through 6 speakers on a bill. So it's all people, it's all relationships, but it's also their timing. And so in committees, same thing. Sometimes it's a politics thing and you know what's going to happen. You know that one side of the aisle, the majority side doesn't want something, it's going to be interim studied. So it's just kind of watching it all. I think the signs are kind of obvious sometimes.
Sure. Um, if a bill, sometimes a bill tends to fall off folks' radar when it is not immediately acted on as either OTP or ITL. And if a bill is retained or re-referred, um, how do you think about your next step in engaging in a bill if that's one of your priorities?
So you have to understand the difference between the biennium years. So the first year of a biennium, the first year after the election, if a bill is retained or referred for study, it still has to come back to the floor in the January of the following year, the second year. So that bill, it's got more movement, it's got more legs. You can't let it go and you can't not pay attention to it. In the second year, because it's the end of the biennium, if they send a bill to interim study, well, they've got in a campaign season. They may not actually come to study it. And there's no vote. Somebody has to refile the bill for the following year after the election. So I would say a bill that's retained and referred in the first year, there's definitely ways to shape it, efforts to shape it. The second year, less so.
Um, once a bill is tabled, when can it come back?
When a bill
When
is
can it
tabled.
pop when can it pop back up?
So when a bill is tabled, you have by deadlines the ability to take it off the table with 50% plus one vote. But after the deadline, it takes a two-thirds vote, which is usually fairly impossible to get, particularly if it's a partisan issue. If a bill is tabled, it can come back because it hasn't been fully acted upon. But depending when it comes back, it really depends on those deadlines and where you are in accordance with those deadlines, what kind of vote it will take to take something off the table. Sometimes you'll see somebody table something in the morning, and then quite honestly, depending on how the vote counts are going in the room, might come off of it in the afternoon.
Right. And that is all to say, I want to make sure people understand that if a bill that you're tracking has been tabled, they are not going to add in the regular calendar when they when they intend to take it off the
Nope,
table. It's going
nope,
to
it's not
pop up.
scheduled. It can happen at any time.
It's going to pop up when the speaker looks around and has the votes that they
Yep.
decide that they need to do that. So, um, I wanted to spend more time on the implications of an election year. We don't have time for that, unfortunately. Sam and I have a immovable meeting after this call. Um, Maybe that is worthy of an entirely separate discussion. But obviously want people to be aware that the watchword going into 2026 is affordability. We have used the term Rorschach here at CNH so many times that has become incredibly cliche, but it is um, what that means and how we can tie um, family economics to our issues. And who can do that most effectively is going to be really important, not only for our advocacy, but for which candidates can be most successful going into 2026. It's going to be on everyone's mind, elected official, advocate, lobbyist. This is what we're thinking about going into 2026. So, finally, I just want to point you to a couple of resources here. We have mentioned the General Court website. In contrast to most New Hampshire state government websites, it's actually incredibly helpful when it works. You can find almost anything you need to find, right? So right there on the homepage, there are links to both the House and Senate calendars as well as a separate meeting schedule. Um, those calendars typically come out Thursday afternoon, which is tough when you're planning for a public hearing on Monday morning, but that's the way it works. So dance with the one that brung you. You can search any bill docket. Um, Something that was pointed out to me that I wasn't doing initially was that you can subscribe to updates on individual bills from that docket page, and then you'll get an email every single time that a status change on that bill, whether there's an amendment or a vote or a committee recommendation, you'll get an email every single time that happens. It can be a little much when you're tracking 60 or 70 bills, but it's actually incredibly helpful. Um, on our website, in our member portal later this month, our legislative tracker for 2026 will go live. So if you are a CNH member, you will be able to see all the bills that CNH is tracking, along with our position, what those bills do, as well as where they are in the process, what the next steps are, and of course, staying updated on all the events uh, and programming that we have going on. So we hope you will make use of both of those URLs there. And lastly, to contact us at CNH for all things legislative, that's me. For things regulatory, that is Chris. And sort of everything else goes to Sam. So,
And if
um,
anybody needs government affairs representation, we encourage you to consider J. Grimbilas Strategic
yes,
Solutions
we do.
as your
Thank you.
potential service provider.
Um, Want to
My,
say,
my only thing I wanted to say is
Mhm.
when you're dealing with legislators, be kind. Okay, they may not be on your side, but they're still people and you might work with them on something else. Don't ever just remember your best approach is a professional kind approach. That's my 2 cents.
Absolutely. The value of positive reinforcement is super, super real.
Mhm.
Um, in this world. So Want to say thank you again, Jodi. We are better and smarter when you are around. We really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will send out the slides and this recording to you. Again, that will be also be in our member portal. Um, yeah, thank you. Looking forward to following up. If you have more questions, reach out.
Thank you
Cheers,
all.
everybody.
Thank you.